friends, welcome back to the Avocado Toast Budget. If you're new here, my name is Lexa, and today I'm going to walk you through exactly how I'm going to set up my YNAB budget for 2023 from start to finish. This video is perfect if you're a beginner to YNAB because I'm going to go through step by step everything that you need to know in order to get your budget started. But as an added little fun bonus, I'm going to be using my real numbers, that way you can see what my budget looks like. Now I'm actually coming to you from the future because I've already filmed this video, and as I was sitting down and editing it, I realized that it was probably better to split it into two different parts. So in today's video, part one, we are going to go through the entire setup of your budget in YNAB, including how to budget for things like your fixed expenses, variable expenses, savings goals, debt payoff goals, and investments, how exactly the system of YNAB works, what it's going to look like and what to expect when you first log onto the platform, and how to make sure that you include everything in your budget and you're not forgetting anything. We're also going to go over one of my favorite parts about YNAB, which is setting up targets for each of your categories. This is going to help keep you on track with your budget, and it really forms the foundation of what YNAB is based off of, which is a zero-based budget. The setup of part one is getting your budget ready to go, and then part two is going to cover the execution of your budget, including how credit cards work in YNAB, how to assign the money that you have on hand to each of your categories, what to do on payday, and how to track your expenses. Part two should be up not too long after part one, so I will definitely link that down in the description box below and also up in the iCards. It will, of course, also be part of the YNAB playlist that you can find in the description box below. Even with breaking these videos up into two parts, I know that there's a lot to cover, so I've split this video up into chapters. So if you need to go back and reference certain parts, or you're just looking for a specific aspect of YNAB, hopefully that'll make it even easier for you to navigate these videos. And in case you've never heard of YNAB before, it stands for You Need a Budget, and it's a budgeting system that you can use on your desktop, tablet, or phone. For today's video, I'm going to do the setup on my computer. I just think it's so much easier to set it up on your computer, but you can still follow all of these steps if you're on your phone as well. We've got a lot to cover in part one, so let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start off by just naming our budget and making sure all of the general settings are to our liking. I'm going to name mine 2023 Personal Budget. As always, I like to give everything emojis. We'll go over that here in a second. Just give it a little flying money emoji. I'm good with everything else. Let's create our budget. So whether you're new to YNAB or you're creating a new budget, this is going to be the general layout of the things that we've got going on. We've got a few important sections here. Over here is going to be where all of your accounts show up. So YNAB budgets for you, but it does not move money around your accounts. It is just going to show you basically a reflection of the money that you have on hand. In order to do that, you have to tell YNAB what money that you have. That's going to be done over here, showing all of your bank accounts. On this blue portion, you can also see some reports. YNAB has reporting. If you have the toolkit turned on, it has even better reports that I think. This is going to break down spending, net worth, and your income versus expenses. This will have a lot more information on it as time goes on. And then you can also click on here just to see a breakdown of all of your accounts, but it will end up showing here too, giving you a little bit of a snapshot. The main page we're going to be working with and worrying about today is this budget page, which is going to be right here. What we are doing in this section here is categorizing our spending, saving, and debt payoff goals. We do that by having category groups. This is like your umbrella terms, such as bills, frequent, non-monthly, goals, and quality of life here. And then under each umbrella are the individual categories. YNAB gives you a structure to work off of if you want to. We're gonna completely revamp this, but I like that they include this because it gives you a better feel of what we're doing here. So the line item bills are going to be things like your rent, mortgage, internet, or phone bill. These are fixed expenses, expenses that month to month stay relatively the same. But we're also going to include our variable expense categories, things like groceries, eating out, fun money. These are things that you might not know exactly how much you're going to spend in that category from month to month, but we're going to make a plan. We're going to estimate how much we think that we're going to spend. And as time goes on, you'll get better. You'll learn a little bit more about how much you actually spend in those categories. I have some tips for how to better estimate those variable expenses that we'll go over. And then over here, we have just kind of like a overview breakdown. Depending on what you're clicking on, this is going to change. If you click on a specific category, this sidebar is going to change a little bit, and it's going to add this target section here. This section is going to be super important, and one of the reasons why I love YNAB so much that we'll go over here in a second. Now, if you want to work off of the categories and category groups that YNAB has given you here, you totally can. I have a different structure that I like to my budget. So to start off, I'm actually going to go through and just delete all of these. So we have a blank slate and we can get started in a way that makes sense to me and my brain. As a side note, I'm working on a Mac, so some of like the ways that you click and things might be a little bit different, but it's going to be relatively the same on a PC, I would assume. I haven't used a PC since like high school. These little arrows here will hide or expand the category groups. So just to make it easier on myself, I'm going to hide all of those, right click on the category group and delete it. You can also go through and delete individual categories from your budget by right-clicking on those. You'll keep the category group. You'll delete just the individual category, but for here, we're starting new. So now that we have fresh new budget, the first thing that I like to do in my budget is set up all of my category groups and my categories. This is basically just telling YNAB and creating a budget based off of what my expenses are on a month-to-month basis. I like to break down my YNAB budget into the following category groups: fixed expenses, variable expenses, sinking funds, investments, and debt payments. And then I'm just going to move these to put them in the order that I like to see them on my budget. There we go. If you're a beginner who's just starting out, I would recommend that you start with these category groups and then you can kind of work from there. Personally, I am going to add one more, and those are ATB expenses, because sometimes things get pulled out of the wrong account and I have to move things around from my personal to my business budget. So I have a line item there just to make sure that I keep all of that separate, and I know for future Lexa when taxes come around. Which is coming up. I don't want to talk about it. Now that we have our category group, our umbrella, we've got to decide what expenses we're going to put underneath. I believe that the easiest way to do this is to look back at least the last month of your spending and see what is coming out on a month-to-month basis. For fixed expenses, these are going to be your bills, whether those are subscriptions, mortgage or car or insurance payments. If something has a specific date that it comes out of your account with a specific amount, I would count that under a fixed expense. Under the category group, we're gonna click Add Category. This is going to be the name. I like to name mine in a very specific way to give me all of the information that I need. I do the name of the expense, not in caps, how much it is, the date that it is due, and the account that it comes out of. You don't need to put this in the name of the category if you don't want to. All of this information we are going to tell YNAB about later. For me, this just makes it so much easier to reference all of this information very quickly. If anything changes, I can go back through and edit it, and it just gives me a very easy way for me to look at my finances and see what's going on, especially as we're setting up our budget. One more thing that I like to add just to spice things up a little bit, because if you've been here before, you know I have ADHD, and part of trying to motivate yourself with money around ADHD is making things fun, turning them into a game, making it interesting. And for me, that is emojis. So I'm going to go through and add emojis to the beginning of each of these category names. Click OK, and then we have added that category. Now I'm going to go through and add in all of the expenses that I would consider to be fixed expenses or bills. I'll speed through this so you can see what that looks like, and then we'll reconvene and talk about some of the important parts. Okay, so now I have all of my categories for fixed expenses put in: the name, how much, the date, and the account. You might have noticed I like to put mine in order of when they come out during the month. A little pro tip: if you already know this information before you're inputting it into YNAB, input it in backwards, because YNAB will stack, like the next category you put comes on top of the other. So if I started with the first and worked down, I would then have to go through and move all of these around to be right, which is fine. You can totally do that. You can drag and drop anything to change where they are in your budget. You can even drag and drop between category groups. But just if you happen to know the dates that they come out and you're putting them in order, put them in reverse order if you want them from the first to the last of the month. I like to do this because even if you don't have enough money to cover all of your expenses for the month, you can quickly see what is most important and where your money needs to go starting off with. Now we're going to repeat the same process, but we're going to do it for our variable expenses. Now, variable expenses are often where people get tripped up, which totally makes sense, because how are you supposed to know how much money to spend on things like eating out, groceries, gas, when those things differ so much from month to month? I always tell people the best way for you to do this is to go back through and review your spending over the last 2 to 3 months and take an average of how much you spend in each category. How you decide you want to break up your spending into different categories is just going to completely depend on you, because things like rent, it is one expense for one category, but something like groceries, I could go to the grocery store anywhere between 2 and 20 times a month, depending on what I need to pick up here and there. So it's not just one transaction. Because of that, we are going to have to estimate, which is okay. YNAB helps you through that process, and we will go over that here in a minute. But I think where people get really tripped up with their budget is they try to estimate just based off of what they think that they spend. And a lot of times that's because we're underestimating what we spend in those categories. So trust me, whatever time it takes you to go back through and average what you've spent in different categories over the last few months is going to be worth it in the time, headache, and stress it's going to save you in the long run, knowing you've made an educated guess on how much you're going to spend in those categories in the future. I like to break up my variable expenses into the following categories. Coffee, $50 a month. Plants, $50 a month. Eating out, $250 a month. Groceries, $350 a month, although honestly with how expensive groceries are getting, I might have to bump that up here a little bit. Gas, $100 a month. Fun money, $200 a month. In my favorite oh shit category, $150 a month. This covers anything from overspending to forgotten bills to impulse purchases that I make online at 3 a.m. It's basically just there to work as a buffer inside of my budget, knowing that there are going to be times where I mess up. Now you can make these categories as wide or narrow as what works for you. I think if you're first starting off, creating wider categories that cover more types of expenses is going to work out better for you in the long run because it's going to take less time to execute as you are tracking all of your expenses, but it also just gives you a little bit more wiggle room. And you don't have to think so hard about like what classifies as which category. I've had different categories in the past, from things like Amazon purchases to if you have a specific hobby, you might have a specific line item for that. If you have kids, you're probably going to want to have at least a line item for that. Depending on you and your life and where your money is going to really make a difference here in that variable spending category. But for me, I like to keep it as simple as possible. In the past, I have even just done like one general spending money. Like anything outside of bills, I've done that back when I needed to just kind of reset and simplify and make my budget as easy as possible. I just put all of my extra spending into my variable spending category. It was one category group, one category. I gave myself a specific amount of money, and once that money was up for the end of the month, that was it. That was all I had. I think sometimes that's a little bit too general if you're first starting off, but I also think trying to split it up into like 20 different categories for your variable expenses is gonna overwhelm you, so we wanna find a healthy medium. The next part is one of my favorite parts of budgeting, and those are sinking funds. If you've never heard of sinking funds, I will link a few videos up here in the description box down below that I've done on them. They're basically just all of your non-monthly expenses that you want to save for on a monthly basis. YNAB calls these true expenses. Oftentimes we forget about them because they don't come up on a month-to-month basis, so when we're like reviewing last month's spending, there's a chance that they might not be on there, but they are still expenses that you can and want to plan for. Some really good examples of this are things like car repairs, medical out-of-pocket costs, vet bills, back to school. I talk a lot about these in my video on expenses that you're forgetting to budget for, but I feel like sinking funds is really where you take your budget from the this never works for me, I don't understand why it's not working level, to oh my god, why did I never think of that? That makes so much sense. In my opinion, there are two different types of sinking funds. There are sinking funds that are like annual subscriptions, that they don't come out every month, but we can still save for them on a monthly basis, and we know relatively how much money we're gonna need and when we need it. Something like your Amazon Prime subscription, you can go in, look into your account, and see exactly how much you're gonna owe and when it's due. That is going to be one type of sinking fund that we're setting up. But there's another type of sinking fund that you might not know when you're gonna need that money for that expense, but you do know it's gonna happen eventually, and you can still plan for that expense similar to how we plan for our variable expenses. A good example of this is always car repairs. I don't know exactly when or why I'm going to need to get my car fixed on, but I know it's gonna happen. So I can start setting money aside every month to be prepared for whenever that comes around. I often get the question of how many sinking funds should I have in my budget? Other than your annual subscriptions, which I like to call sinking funds, but you can make that its own separate category group if you want to, I would focus on 3 to 5 different sinking funds. And then as you get used to budgeting and your expenses and you figure out what works to you, you can start adding more and more. I believe right now that I have 13 sinking funds and 4 of those are annual subscriptions. So I have about 9 sinking funds aside from annual subscriptions that I'm working on building up throughout the year. And here's the ones that I have. I have a sinking fund for treat yourself, my cats. This I include for anything like vet bills for them, and also treats, toys, food, things like that. I have another oh shit category. The first category I used for any overspending that I have throughout the month. This oh shit category is something that hopefully I add to every month. It starts to build up. So if there's a bigger expense that I have forgotten about, or a bigger case of overspending, impulse spending, anything like that, it is basically just a larger sum of money that I can use in case anything happens. I'm gonna close those two here so this pops up to the top here. I add a giving category, new car, furniture, moving, because I move a lot, historically speaking, vacation, and car repairs. That is it for the sinking funds that I have that I know I'm gonna need money for them, but I don't know exactly how much or when I'm going to need that money. So in that case, for these, I just put the name and the little emoji. We will set a goal for each of those categories inside of YNAB and tell YNAB how much we want to set aside for each one of those, but we're going to do that here in the next few steps. The other sinking funds that I have are a little bit more specific. The first one is Christmas 2023. It is not an annual subscription, but I give myself a very specific amount of money to spend, and I know that I'm gonna need it sometime in December. So it's a little bit more specific than some of those more open-ended sinking funds. For things like annual fees and annual subscriptions, I like to do a similar kind of vibe to what I do for our fixed expenses, which is the name of the expense, how much it's going to be, and then what month or day it comes out. Now, I actually have an example of a non-monthly expense that is also not an annual expense, and that is my trash bill. It comes out every 3 months. I've tried to ask them to let me just pay for the year. They won't. I hate that it comes out every 3 months because it's also not automated. What could be worse for my ADHD? Come on. There are a few different ways that you can go about non-monthly expenses inside of YNAB. For me, since this is the only one that I have, I prefer to just put in there how much I'm going to need to pay in the next due date. And then in the next step, I'm gonna tell YNAB that I need to have that money saved by that date, but I'm keeping it in my sinking funds rather than in my fixed expenses. Since it is not a monthly expense, I want to be able to tell my brain and remember that this is something that is abnormal. The next thing that I'm going to add to my YNAB budget is my investments. I think it's important here to specify that this is not keeping track of my actual investments. This is just the monthly contributions I make to my investment accounts. Because for me, that is a kind of expense. It is somewhere my money is going. I could technically put this under a fixed expense. It is just a monthly expense. However, I just like to differentiate it. So I put this extra little category group here. And the last thing is going to be any debt payments. Now, before you go start adding categories here, this is important to differentiate. We are talking about debt payments that are not credit cards. YNAB handles credit cards completely separately. You might have noticed I don't have anything regarding credit cards on here yet, other than my annual fee. And that is for a reason. And I love how YNAB manages credit cards. We'll go over that briefly in here, but I have a more in-depth video about how exactly credit cards work inside of YNAB. So in case by the end of this video you still have more questions or it's not quite clicking, you'll be able to reference that there. I'll put that up here and then also in the description box down below. But for here, this is just separate debt payments outside of your credit card. You could include things like your car payment here, although a lot of people put that into their monthly expenses, and that's probably what I would do as well. What I generally include here is things like personal loans, or in my case, student loan payments. Now, the only student loan debt that I have is federal, so right now it is currently still on hold. So I still want to put that in my budget because I want to keep in mind that it is going to come up eventually, and I don't want to forget about that. It's just a good reminder. However, I'm not going to budget for this until it is actually due because I'm not working on paying off my student loans any quicker than what I need to. So I just have that on hold for right now. This monthly payment could also change depending on what happens with forgiveness and stuff like that and how much I end up wanting to put toward my student loans, but that's what it is at right now. Really, this is just a placeholder for me to remember that eventually I'm going to need to include that into my budget and therefore include that into my plan of where all of my money is going. Again, I have this ATV expenses, but we're not going to worry about that. So, taking a quick look, this is what my budget looks like inside of YNAB. Now, all I've done right now is just name my categories. I haven't told YNAB that I need $350 a month for my utilities yet. I just put this information there for myself. So the next thing that I like to do is go through and create a target for every single category. And this is, in my opinion, where YNAB shines. In my opinion, YNAB works best when you give each category a target or a goal, unless it is something like my student loans that are on hold. But again, YNAB is based off of a zero-based budget, which means that you want to assign every dollar a job. You want to be able to work with YNAB to figure out what the money that you have on hand right now needs to do for you until you get paid again. And the best way to do that is to have all of this set up. I totally understand the setup of this takes a little bit of time, but I promise you on a day-to-day basis, this is going to save you hours of time every week and every month whenever you are actually executing your budget, which is the biggest part of budgeting. We can create this awesome plan all day, but if we don't have a good way of executing it, what's the point? Assigning these targets is going to allow YNAB to shine in a way that I feel like Excel spreadsheets just don't work for me personally. I want to give a disclaimer. There's a good chance that I will accidentally say the word goal instead of target multiple times throughout this video. For years, YNAB called these goals category goals, and then they switched the names around of different things. So now they call them category targets. If I say something like goal, category, goal, we're talking about the same thing here. And that is that whenever you click on a specific category, not a specific category group, over here, this thing pops up that we mentioned at the beginning that says target and create a target for this expense. So we're gonna click add, and then you're going to choose your target type. YNAB currently has 4 different target types set up: needed for spending, savings balance, monthly savings builder, and monthly debt payment. I have a breakdown of what the different types of goals / categories are inside of YNAB and what you want to use them for. I believe since that video, they've added this monthly debt payment, so I don't think that that is included, but it breaks down the difference between the other 3, which are the ones that you're going to be using for the majority of your categories. Needed for spending goal is personally the one that I use the most. YNAB will tell you it's for things like groceries, holidays, or vacations. This is basically going to tell YNAB that you need to have money on hand for this expense, and you can specify a specific date that you need that money by. For me, all of my fixed expenses are going to be needed for spending goals because I can tell YNAB that I need $1,280 for rent. I need that every single month, and then you can even go through and specify the exact date of the month. If you're someone who doesn't have enough money on hand right now to fund your full month of expenses, I think it's really important that you go through and change the date of this if it is an expense that has a specific date. That's because YNAB is going to be able to help you to decide where that money needs to go first before you get paid again, and expenses that are due coming up soon are going to be the things that need to take the highest priority most of the time. This target type is also really nice because if you have any expenses that are non-monthly expenses, such as weekly, yearly, we'll get to that, or custom, like my trash, you can do that here as well. For me, all of my fixed expenses are going to look very similar to this: the amount, monthly, and the specific date. When you click Save Target, a few things are going to happen here. Now, when the category is highlighted, we have this information. Now YNAB knows all of the information that I pretty much put here, which is how much money I need, when I need it by. This is why I like to put that information right here, because when I'm going back through and creating my targets, it's so easy to just plug that information in, move along. If for whatever reason you need to go through and edit this, if it changes, if you realize that you've put in the wrong information, you can just go through and click that little edit button. You can also delete anything from here as well. Like I said, the needing for spending target is by far the one that I use the most inside of my personal budget and the way that I like to set things up. But depending on your budget, you might want to take advantage of some of these other targets as well. So we have the savings balance. This is really good for what I would consider like your emergency fund. So if I have a goal to have $2,000 inside of an emergency fund, if something happens, I've saved up my emergency fund, but then let's say my car breaks down and I didn't have enough money inside of my car repair sinking funds, and I have to pull $500 from that emergency fund, YNAB, if I use the savings balance target, is going to see, oh, look, hey, we had $2,000, which was our target, but we had to spend some money from this category. Now we need to work on replenishing that money and getting us back up to the $2,000 mark. You can choose whether you want to specify a date inside of this or not, which can also really be helpful for things like a down payment on a car or your mortgage. If you know one of your goals is that by next summer you want to have $3,000 saved up for a down payment, you can tell YNAB that information here. There's also something called the monthly savings builder. This is one of the this is simple, straightforward savings target that you can have inside of YNAB. If you don't know a lot of information about your goal or your sinking fund, and you just know hey, I want to put $20 inside for car repairs every single month, no matter what, whether I end up spending money from that category or not, this is going to be a good target for you to have here. I'm really excited that they added this monthly debt payment target because you are able to do this thing here where you pair it with a loan. I'll go through and I'll show you what that would look like if I was actively making payments to my student loans right now. That way you can see what that looks like with your debt payment goals. But for now that we've given a little bit of a run through of what the different targets are so you can decide which ones work best for you, I'm going to go through and set a target for every single one of my fixed expenses. Just as a reminder, I'm going to classify all of my fixed expenses as a needed for spending target. You can specify the exact date. In my case, I'm not going to take the time to go through and put the exact date, but you can if you want to. Oh, so here I accidentally put $23 because I saw the 23rd. It's not $65. So I'm just going to click that edit button and change it, and then we're good to go. Also, to clarify, I have 2 of what appears to be the same thing here. It's not an accidental repeat. It's that both of these are for Dory and Oliver. They're just the exact same amount with the exact same company coming out on the exact same day. Technically, I could create a $22 one here, but it's just easier since it comes out twice of my account. I like to separate those expenses. A little bit of a note on rounding. This will make a little bit more sense as we go through and tell YNAB how much money we have and start to assign that to different categories. But for fixed expenses, I like to be as accurate as possible. For example, the fact that I have $17.01 here on book of the month instead of just $17. And that's because if I rounded down and I told YNAB I needed $17 a month for this, every single month I'm technically going to be a cent underfunded, and that's just gonna be one more step I'm gonna have to take to move money around. So I prefer to be as exact as possible. For variable expenses, I also like to use the needed for spending target. You are going to either over or underspend in some of these categories at some point, and don't worry, we're gonna go through how to tackle that as well. But a little bit of a pro tip, err on the side of overestimating. You would rather assume that you're gonna spend $500 a month on groceries and then actually spend $400 than assume you're gonna spend $200 and then actually spend $400. Now, for sinking funds, this is where it is really going to differ depending on how your brain works, what works for you, and what kind of sinking fund it is. For things like annual subscriptions, I like to do the needed for spending goal, but make it customized. So in the case of my Prime annual subscription, I'm gonna say I need $150, and I know that it is in May. I actually know it's May 5th, but if I'm not quite sure of the date, I just know the month, I would err on the side of saying the first of the month, that way you have it covered even if it's later in the month. The nice thing about doing a needed for spending goal on things like your annual subscriptions is that you can click repeat, and you can have it repeat every single year. So since this is something that is going to keep coming out of my account, I want to do that. That way here a year from now or here in May, whenever this comes up, I don't have to remember to redo this target, because if I didn't do the repeat come May 5th, 2023, if I have this fully funded, that's it. YNAB is just gonna see this as a category sitting there. It's not gonna have an active target assigned to it, and therefore I could accidentally realize that I'm not setting money aside every month in order to reach this goal. I don't know if I did a good job making this clear and explaining this while we were setting up our sinking funds, but the reason that we create categories like this and then we are going to create targets is that YNAB is going to set money aside every single month in order to start building up these sinking funds so that you can reach your goal. For example, something like Christmas. A lot of times, even though I knew that that expense was coming, Christmas and the holidays was always something that would trip me up, and I would end up overspending on a credit card and then going into even more debt because I wasn't prepared to have to spend that money and buy people gifts. But the reality of it was that I knew that that expense was coming up eventually, and it's so much easier to set little amounts aside every single month to add up to that $500 throughout the year, rather than having to spend $500 from one paycheck, the paycheck before Christmas, and then you also still have all of these other expenses that you're trying to cover. So basically the goal with sinking funds is just to try to break up these bigger, less frequent expenses into smaller monthly savings goals. I'm going to create the same type of target for my credit card annual fee. That is in May, but I don't know exactly when, so I'm just going to put the first, repeat every year, save target. Now that I have the more specific sinking funds taken care of, what about all of these other sinking funds that we have no idea how much it's going to cost or when we're going to need that money by? There are two different ways to look at this. If I know that one of my goals is that I want to have around $10,000 saved up for a new car by the end of 2025, I can create a target that matches that. I can either do a needed for spending goal where I save $10,000 by a specific date, for example, by the end of 2025. When I do that, YNAB is going to do the math for me and say, okay, in order to reach that goal, having $10,000 saved up by the end of 2025, you need to set aside $277.78 every single month from here until then. If you have certain sinking funds you want to tackle in this way, I actually think it's better to do a savings balance goal of $10,000 by a specific date. Again, this is because this type of sinking fund is basically like a down payment on a car, right? Like, I want this full $10,000. This is not a category like Christmas that throughout the year I might be buying gifts for people and spending from that category along the way, with the overall intention that overall throughout the year I only want to spend $500 on Christmas, whether that is all in December or spread throughout the year. With a down payment, my goal is to save up for one singular expense, that payment that I make on my car. I don't need that money to spend as I am saving up for it. So the way that YNAB codes their targets, the savings balance is going to work better for this. But on that note, for a new car, let's say that I have a goal of getting a new car because I know that eventually my 2012 Chevy Cruze is going to bite the dust, but I have like no clue how much I'm going to need or when I'm going to need that money by. I just know that I want to start saving up for that goal. In that case, I could do a monthly savings builder where I can say I want to set $250 aside every single month to start building up my new car fund. This kind of open-ended goal is going to work really well for your open-ended sinking funds. For me, I don't have a specific idea of when or how much my new car is going to be, so I'm going to keep that $250 monthly savings target. I'm going to create a similar target for car repairs, where I set aside $100 a month toward this category. If you have a specific vacation in mind, the needed for spending goal is a really good target to have because a vacation isn't just one expense, right? We have lots of different expenses inside of that category. You could have airfare, travel, food, the hotel, excursions. YNAB is going to adjust as you are saving and spending from that category over time. But for me, I don't have a specific one in mind yet, so I'm going to do the monthly savings builder instead. Okay, sorry, my camera didn't stop recording, but my screen stopped recording. So all that I've done is I went through and finished filling out all of my sinking fund and my investment targets. My investment target, I made a needed for spending goal. And then I went through and I showed you how this debt payment goal works, but now that we are recording again, I will go back through and show you again. So in this case, I'm going to pretend like my student loans are active. That way, in case any of you have debts that you need to be paying off, again, this is anything other than credit card debt, we can cover that here. Now we're back on track. Okay. And now we're going to go down to the monthly debt payment target and click over here to start off with pair with a loan. This is where you're going to tell YNAB what kind of debt that you have. So we've already given it a name. You can specify what kind of debt that it is: mortgage, auto loan, student loan, personal loan, medical debt. Again, remember, this is anything outside of credit card debt. In my case, this is a student loan. This current account balance is how much do you currently owe that lender. In my case, I believe it's like this much. Some of these numbers we're going to have to make up for the sake of the example. For interest rates, it's a little bit tricky on federal student loans because technically the $68,000 is actually a cumulative of a bunch of little loans that all have their own interest rates, of course. You can either take the highest interest rate if you want to overestimate how much you'll be paying, or you can take an average. Or if like student loans was the thing that you were tackling the hardest right now and you were very dedicated to that, you could technically go through and create individual loans for each little loan that you owe under your federal loan with the individual account balances and interest rates. If I were doing this, I would just average them. So we're going to say 4.8. The monthly payment required by your lender. If you're targeting this debt right now and you're wanting to put extra payments toward it, that's totally fine. You can do that later. This is just how much is the minimum amount that you owe in order to stay in good standing every month. For me, on the current payment plan that I'm on, that would be $422 a month. So in that case, YNAB is going to do some calculations. We paired it with our loan, and it is going to tell us if we are making our minimum monthly payments. It is going to take me 22 years and 1 month to pay off this loan, and therefore I will have it paid off by February of 2045. Yes, these numbers are bleak, okay? I know. However, if you're wanting to target this goal, you can tweak some things and move it around. Let's say I know that I can actually put $500 a month in total toward this goal. When I do that, YNAB is now going to show me that rather than, I believe it was February of 2045, we are now going to be able to pay it off by October of 2039 just by putting an extra $78 a month toward that goal. It's cool because it's going to show you how much money I'd be saving in interest over time and how many years I am going to save by putting a little bit of extra money toward your debt. This is really cool because it helps you to decide what debts are most important to you to be paying off right now, and it gives you a really good visual of how little amounts can make a really big difference. You can always go back through and edit any of this information. There's a payoff simulator here. I've never used that. Also, if you're interested, I will make a video like really detailing this more in depth for a bunch of different types of loans and figure out the best way for it to work for each type. If that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments. But for now, I'm actually going to go through and delete this target, and I'm going to delete this loan because both of them are things that I don't care to worry about or have reflected in my budget right now. So as of right now, we have completed that huge first step. If you're still here, you've done the hard part. All of this time and effort that you have put in, I promise, is going to pay back 1,000-fold in how easy it is now going to be for you to execute this budget on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. Because we have given YNAB so much information to work with here. The final big part of the equation is that we need to tell YNAB how much money that we have. This is based off of a zero-based budget. Traditional budgets would say, okay, I need to be preparing for February. How much money do I think that I'm going to make, and what do I want to do with that money in theory? A zero-based budget says, hey, we don't technically know what February is gonna look like. If you have a variable income, you might not know exactly how much money you're gonna make. You don't know yet if you've had unexpected expenses come up. So instead, taking all of this information, knowing what our expenses, debt payoff, and savings goals are, what does the money that you have on hand right now need to do for you until you get paid again or until you get more money? Why I love zero-based budgets is because it gives you the most control over the money that you have, and it is fantastic if you are a low-income earner, you feel like you're drowning, you make less than you spend every single month, or you have big debt payoff or savings goals. And I want to make it very clear that while there is a learning curve to YNAB, and in order to get the most out of it, it does take a little bit of time to set everything up. You are not going to be going through this whole process like every single month. This is just the like getting everything started so that future you has things taken care of. So this is where I'm going to go ahead and stop part 1. There's a good chance if you're watching this that part 2 has already been uploaded. If it has, I'll leave it in the description box down below. It'll also be the video that you can click on after this video ends. Definitely leave me a comment if there's anything you're still wondering about or if you have any specific questions. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.